Imagine standing at an airport, passport in hand, ready to board your flight. You've traveled the world, visited countless countries, and never had an issue. But today, everything changes. A black woman hands her passport to security. Instead of a quick stamp, the officer looks at her suspiciously. Moments later, right in front of everyone, he cuts the passport in half. But what he doesn't know, she's a high-ranking UN diplomat, and the moment he realizes his mistake, it's already too late. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Stay till the end. You won't believe how this one ends. Dr. Amara Okoye was no ordinary traveler. She was a United Nations diplomat, a global humanitarian, and a respected advocate for human rights. She had spent years negotiating peace treaties, advising world leaders, and working on critical international policies. Her passport wasn't just a travel document. It was a symbol of her status and authority. She had traveled to over 50 countries without issue. But today, standing at an airport security checkpoint, she was about to experience something she had never faced before. Officer Mark Thompson, a senior immigration officer, was known for being strict, arrogant, and quick to judge. He had been working in airport security for years and believed he could spot a fake document just by looking at it. When Amara handed him her passport, his demeanor changed. He didn't see a diplomat. He didn't see an influential global leader. He saw a black woman with a powerful passport and assumed it was fake. The airport was bustling with travelers moving through security, unaware of what was about to unfold. Most passengers were getting their passports stamped and moving on, but at Amara's counter, time was standing still. She expected professionalism, respect, and a routine check. Instead, she was about to face the worst humiliation of her life. Amara's confidence began to waver as Officer Thompson scrutinized her passport. His eyes narrowed as he flipped through the pages, clearly searching for any excuse to reject it. "I'm sorry," he said flatly, "but this doesn't seem right. Where did you get this passport from?" Amara's eyebrows furrowed. She had used her diplomatic passport for years without incident, and now, standing in an international airport, she was being questioned as if she were a criminal. "Excuse me?" she said, trying to maintain her composure. "This is an official UN diplomatic passport." Officer Thompson didn't look up. "I know what it says, but I'm not convinced." He then pushed the passport away from him as if it were just another piece of paper. "I need to verify it." The irritation in Amara's chest was growing. She had dealt with security checks countless times, but she had never been made to feel like a suspect before. "You don't need to verify anything," she said, trying to keep her tone steady. "This passport is legitimate." Instead of scanning the passport or even looking it up in his system, Officer Thompson began to ask her questions that seemed completely unnecessary. "Where are you traveling from?" he demanded. "Where are you going? What's your business here?" Amara could feel the growing unease of the people in line behind her. A few of them had started to watch the exchange, sensing that something was wrong. She tried to explain again, but Thompson was already too deep into his assumptions. "You'll need to step aside while I call in a supervisor," he muttered, dismissing her without so much as a glance. Her patience was wearing thin. "I don't need a supervisor," she said, her voice calm but with a firmness that demanded respect. "I need you to process my passport." But Thompson wasn't listening. He called for backup, and soon another officer arrived at the scene. The second officer didn't seem much different than Thompson, rigid, dismissive, and completely uninterested in listening to Amara's explanation. Instead, they both started to question her legitimacy as a UN diplomat, asking for further documentation, going as far as suggesting that her passport was a fake. Amara stood there, trying to make sense of the absurdity of the situation. Why were they doing this? It was clear that her passport was legitimate, so why were they making her feel like a criminal? The thought of being detained over a clear case of racial profiling made her blood boil. "I need you to process my passport now," she said, feeling the tension in her body grow. But just as she was about to demand to speak to someone higher up, the unthinkable happened. Thompson grabbed a pair of scissors from the counter and without hesitation cut her passport in half, right in front of her. A stunned silence fell over the checkpoint. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Her passport, her lifeline to the world, was now in pieces. "Excuse me," she gasped. "What did you just do?" Thompson barely looked at her. "We can't allow fake documents in this airport. That passport is invalid." Amara could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You can't just cut a passport like that. You haven't even verified it yet." By now, a small crowd had gathered around, watching with wide eyes. Some of them began to murmur under their breath, realizing that something deeply unfair was taking place. Amara felt a surge of frustration. "This is outrageous," she said, keeping her voice calm, but the tension was thick in the air. "I am a UN diplomat, and you've just destroyed official government property. Do you realize the consequences of what you've done?" For the first time, Thompson seemed to hesitate. He looked at the pieces of her passport in his hand, unsure of how to proceed. But before he could respond, another officer, a higher-ranking official, stepped forward. "What's going on here?" the officer asked in an authoritative tone, eyeing the scene with confusion. Amara quickly turned toward him. "You need to stop this. This officer has just destroyed my passport and is accusing me of carrying fake documents. I'm a UN diplomat." The higher-ranking officer's face shifted immediately, recognizing Amara's importance. He turned to Thompson. "What is this?" I didn't know," Thompson stammered. "I thought it was fake, sir. I assumed." "You assumed?" The senior officer's voice grew colder. "Do you have any idea who this is?" "This is Dr. Amara Okoye, one of the highest-ranking UN diplomats. You've just destroyed an official UN passport." Thompson's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the words wouldn't come out. The senior officer's expression hardened as he turned back to Amara. "I am so sorry for this. We will rectify this situation immediately." Amara was still in shock. She had just been humiliated in front of everyone, treated like a criminal for no reason other than the color of her skin. She tried to take a breath and regain her composure. "I want to know exactly how you're going to fix this." The senior officer spoke quickly, turning to one of the staff members nearby. "I'll need you to contact the UN headquarters immediately and let them know what's happened. We will get a full investigation started." Amara nodded, but she wasn't satisfied. "I want to speak directly to the UN authorities, and I want an official apology for the way I've been treated here. And I want this officer removed from duty immediately." The officer nodded. "Absolutely, ma'am. We will handle this right away." As the staff moved to fix the situation, Amara took a moment to collect herself. She wasn't going to let this slide. The moment they thought they could treat her as lesser because of her appearance was the moment they crossed the line. She demanded that they replace her passport immediately and sent a clear message. No one should be subjected to this kind of mistreatment. The airport had gone completely silent. Dr. Amara Okoye stood there, still reeling from the shock of what had just happened. Her passport, her official UN diplomatic passport, was now in pieces, and Officer Thompson stood in front of her, looking more uncomfortable than ever. But Amara didn't let the anger bubble over. She wasn't about to let him off the hook without a fight. The senior officer, now fully aware of his mistake, rushed to her side. He apologized again, but the damage was done. "Please, ma'am, we will fix this immediately. Let me contact the embassy. Let me get you a new passport." Amara shook her head, her eyes narrowing with focus. "You have no idea what had just happened here, do you?" The senior officer paused, unsure of what to say. I don't understand, ma'am. We were just trying to follow the protocol." "No," Amara replied, her voice firm. "You were following your bias, your assumption that I didn't belong." The senior officer swallowed hard, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. "You're right, but this isn't how things are supposed to go." Amara nodded slowly. "I've traveled all over the world for the United Nations. I've represented people of all nations, fought for peace, human rights, and dignity." She took a deep breath. "And here, at this airport, I've been treated as a criminal for no reason other than the color of my skin." The officer looked horrified. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't know." Amara looked at him for a long moment, her expression steady but full of authority. "You didn't know, but that doesn't change what happened. You've just destroyed an official document that represents years of service to humanity. It's not just a passport. It's a symbol of my work and my commitment to global peace." The crowd around her had grown, many of them standing frozen, watching the confrontation unfold. Some customers began whispering, realizing what had happened and what was at stake. They too had witnessed her humiliation. Amara's strength had already shifted the room's energy, but it wasn't enough. She wasn't leaving without justice. "I need to speak to someone in charge, someone with the authority to fix this." Her words rang out clear, making everyone in earshot understand the seriousness of the situation. The senior officer nodded, visibly shaking. "Yes, ma'am. I'll contact my supervisor immediately." Amara didn't wait for him to leave. She grabbed her phone and called the United Nations headquarters directly. The situation was escalating, and she wasn't about to let it be swept under the rug. On the other end, a voice answered quickly. "Dr. Okoye, is everything all right? We've been getting reports." Amara explained the situation in calm, precise detail. "I've been disrespected, and my official passport has been destroyed by airport security. I need the highest-ranking official to intervene. Now." Within minutes, a senior UN diplomat and official representatives arrived at the airport. Amara felt a small sense of relief knowing her colleagues would handle this situation. But she knew the process would take time, and she wasn't about to let this incident slip into obscurity. The senior officer who had cut her passport in half stood nearby, shifting uncomfortably as his superiors arrived. He was caught between trying to defend himself and recognizing his mistake. "Dr. Okoye." One of the UN representatives greeted her warmly but with concern. "We've been informed about the incident. We're so sorry this happened to you." Amara nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate that. But there's more to this than just a damaged passport. We need to look at why this happened and how many other people have been treated this way." The senior officer, now under the scrutiny of both UN representatives and his superiors, was sweating. I thought there was something wrong with the passport. I just followed the process." Amara looked at him, meeting his gaze directly. "You followed the process, but you didn't follow the basics of professionalism. You didn't ask the right questions. You made assumptions. And you acted on those assumptions without verification." The senior officer's face reddened. He didn't have a defense. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I've made a terrible mistake." Amara didn't flinch. A mistake can be forgiven, but the damage is done. She turned toward the UN representatives. "I want an immediate investigation into the conduct of the airport staff here. We can't let this happen again." The senior officer turned to his colleagues, but before he could speak, another officer stepped forward. "Doctor Okoye, this will be handled. We'll take full responsibility. But please know, this will be corrected." The senior officer didn't seem convinced. His career was hanging by a thread. The entire airport staff knew that his action could lead to serious consequences for him. Amara's voice remained steady as she addressed the gathered crowd. "The reason this is happening, the reason people like me are targeted, is because of racial bias. It's systemic, and it's happening everywhere. Today, I want to make sure that every single person who's ever been treated unfairly gets the justice they deserve." Her words echoed in the room, striking a chord with those who had witnessed the entire exchange. Some passengers began to clap, supporting Amara in her stance for justice. After the confrontation, Amara thought the worst was over. But as she walked away from the airport counter, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a colleague back at the UN headquarters, someone who had been following the situation closely. "Dr. Okoye, you need to see this." Amara paused for a moment, the world around her still in motion. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message. The words on her phone made her stomach drop. A viral video of the incident had already begun to spread online. The footage, captured by a bystander, showed Officer Thompson cutting her passport in front of the entire crowd. It was clear this wasn't just a mistake anymore. The caption read, "UN Diplomat humiliated at airport security. Racial profiling caught on camera." Amara's hands trembled slightly as she read through the flood of comments below the video. The online world was quickly erupting in outrage. But what she hadn't expected was the sheer depth of anger and frustration that people had about the situation. Dozens of others began to share their own experiences of being mistreated or judged unfairly at airports, banks, and businesses because of their appearance. People were openly questioning how many times these incidents went unreported. But then, amidst the thousands of comments, one stood out. "This is the third time I've seen this officer treat people like this. My brother was detained 2 years ago for the same thing." Amara stared at the screen, her eyes widening. Could it be? Was it possible that Officer Thompson had been doing this all along, targeting innocent people, ruining their day, and facing no consequences because of his position? She immediately contacted her team. This wasn't just about her anymore. If Officer Thompson had done this before, there had to be a pattern. Her colleague at the UN confirmed her fears. They began pulling up records of past incidents, official complaints, police reports, and even social media mentions. It turned out this wasn't the first time Officer Thompson had been accused of racial profiling. There were reports from 2 other travelers who had been harassed by him in similar ways, but none of the complaints had been properly followed up. He had been acting with impunity, and no one had taken the steps to stop him. Amara knew it was time for the world to see the truth. She called a press conference to address the situation. The room was packed. Cameras flashed as she walked up to the podium, her hands still slightly shaking but her resolve stronger than ever. "I've just seen the video that has gone viral," she began, her voice firm. "And I am not just speaking for myself today. I'm speaking for everyone who has ever been discriminated against, whether it's been in an airport, a hotel, or any other institution." The room fell silent. This incident is not isolated. Officer Thompson's actions have affected many, and it's time we hold those in power accountable for the harm they cause. It is time to stop ignoring the problem of racial profiling, especially in places of authority, like airports and security. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I am not just calling for justice for myself. I am calling for change. I want everyone who has ever faced unfair treatment to be heard, and I want the systems in place to change so this never happens again." The journalists in the room were already typing away, capturing every word. The story had taken a life of its own, and Amara knew it would be hard to ignore now. But there was still more to the story. Amara's phone buzzed again, and her colleague sent her a message. "Dr. Okoye, we've just confirmed that Officer Thompson wasn't just acting alone. There were other complaints about officers in his unit involved in similar actions, all dismissed by higher-ups." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just one officer who was at fault. There was a culture of discrimination that had been allowed to fester within the system. The more Amara dug, the more the truth revealed itself. "This isn't just a problem at one airport," she said during the press conference. "This is a problem in many systems worldwide. The fact that complaints like these are ignored and swept under the rug only allows it to happen again and again. We cannot allow this behavior to continue. We must act." The press conference was a turning point. News outlets picked up the story, and the story spread like wildfire across social media platforms. The hashtags "Stop Racial Profiling" and "Justice for Amara" began trending. People from all over the world were sharing their own stories of discrimination, their own painful experiences of being judged before they even opened their mouths. But as the story continued to unfold, Amara was faced with an unexpected twist. One of the higher-ups in the airport's management reached out to her with a confession. They admitted that the system was rigged to protect those in power, and that the complaints against Officer Thompson and his colleagues were systematically ignored for years. It wasn't just one officer. It was the entire system. Amara was floored. She had never expected such an admission. But this was a sign that the truth was finally coming out. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had been wronged. The story had gone viral. After Amara's press conference, the world had woken up to what had happened. Her experience wasn't an isolated incident. It was a stark reminder that systemic issues were alive and well, even in places where we trusted authorities to keep us safe. What started as an attempt to humiliate a high-ranking diplomat had turned into a movement for justice and equality. Amara received thousands of messages from people across the globe, all sharing their stories of being judged or mistreated based on how they looked, where they came from, or what they wore. But the most powerful messages came from people who had been afraid to speak up until now. In the weeks following the incident, Amara wasn't just dealing with the fallout from the airport's actions. She had become the face of a broader conversation about how race and identity affected people's lives, both publicly and privately. It was no longer just about her passport. It was about how many others had suffered silently for the same reasons. Amara's legal team was working on getting her a new passport and ensuring the airport faced consequences for its actions. She had also made sure to demand full accountability from the higher-ups who allowed this kind of behavior to fester. The systemic issues didn't start and end with Officer Thompson. They ran deep within the airport's policies, training, and attitudes. But amid all the legal work and public scrutiny, Amara felt something else stirring inside her, a sense of purpose that had only grown stronger. She realized that her fight was no longer just about the wrong done to her. It was about making sure it never happened to anyone again. One evening, Amara sat down with her team to discuss the next steps. As much as she wanted to see justice for herself, her real goal was always bigger than that. She was determined to ensure that no one else would ever have to go through what she had. "It's not just about getting a new passport," she said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "It's about making sure that when we speak up about racial profiling, we actually see change." Her team nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "We need to make real change in the airport systems," one of her colleagues said. "We need policies that hold people accountable, training that doesn't just focus on procedures, but on respect for all people." Amara smiled at the thought. This wasn't just about removing bad officers. It was about ensuring that all people, no matter their background, were treated with dignity and fairness. Over the next few months, Amara worked tirelessly with civil rights organizations, legal experts, and international advocacy groups to draft a new set of guidelines for airports and immigration offices. These guidelines focused on anti-racial profiling training, comprehensive diversity programs for all levels of staff, and strict monitoring of complaints from passengers to ensure that no one felt targeted or unfairly treated. She also worked closely with government officials to push for legislation that would make racial profiling illegal at all international airports. Amara knew that real change would only happen when it was backed up by law, but she wasn't going to stop until she saw that law passed. By the time the new training programs began, Amara had earned the respect of thousands of people who saw her as a symbol of courage, resilience, and leadership. She became a leading voice in the global fight against racial injustice, using her position to push for reforms, not just in the airport systems, but also in the way society at large treated people of color. Her own personal experience had ignited a fire in her, and she wasn't about to let it die. Her passport was now replaced, but more importantly, she was no longer just a diplomat. She had become a trailblazer for equality. Amara's story didn't end with an apology or a new passport. Her actions sparked a global conversation, one that led to policy changes, public awareness, and, ultimately, justice. It was a reminder that one voice can make a difference, even when the system tries to silence it. Looking back at everything she had done, Amara felt a deep sense of pride. She had taken a stand when others might have walked away. She had used her platform not only to correct the wrongs done to her, but to speak for the voiceless, to stand up for the underdogs, and to fight for true justice. And in the end, the message was clear. Respect doesn't depend on what you wear, where you come from, or what you look like. Respect should be the baseline for all people, all the time. Amara Okoye's fight didn't end with an apology. It didn't end with her passport being replaced. It went much deeper. What started as an incident of racial profiling at one airport turned into a movement, one that resonated with people around the world. It sparked conversations in boardrooms, airports, and homes about how people were treated because of the color of their skin. The moment she shared her story, it wasn't just her voice being heard. It was the voices of thousands of people who had faced similar mistreatment. It was the moment when a broken system began to show cracks, and the world finally started questioning the unjust practices that were often ignored. Amara had used her platform not only to correct a personal wrong, but to demand accountability from institutions that had been acting with impunity for too long. But the battle didn't stop here. Now, it's your turn. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Have you ever witnessed someone else being treated with injustice because of their race, appearance, or background? What if this wasn't just one incident? What if it happens every day in places we trust? What are we willing to do to change that? Comment yes if you believe racial profiling should end now, or no if you think there's still more work to be done. If you stand for equality, comment fairness for all. Let's make sure this conversation doesn't end here. Have you ever been mistreated by an authority figure? Share your story in the comments and let's speak up together. Like if you believe respect, kindness, and equality should always win. Share this story to remind everyone. Respect should never depend on your background or appearance. This is just the beginning. If we stay silent, these problems will continue. It's time to raise our voices.